This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
I just wanted to say, Jason, I've been following you for a long time. 10 years ago is when I first saw your course. And I'm telling you, the way that things have played out are way better than you projected for me personally. Obviously, it's been, a good 6 years, but now I'm ready to kick it into high gear as, I want to really build a portfolio that's, 4 or 5 times what I have already. Obviously, your advice has been fantastic. It's been life-changing for me.
Welcome to episode 1855, and thank you for joining us from 189 countries worldwide. Well, I'm using the flag as the backdrop today because I'm feeling a little patriotic. No, and I know most people listening, well, not most people listening, but most countries listening, I shouldn't say most people, are not in the US of A, and we're glad to have you, but you probably saw the movie. And we saw it over the weekend. Yes, that is Top Gun, the remake of the long, multi-decade anticipated movie. And it's great. Wow, what a great movie. Now, you may not know this about me, but I love aviation. The first model, I used to build model aircraft as a kid, and the first model I ever built was the F-14 Tomcat. Yes, and that was in the movie, that plane. That's the one, well, I'm not going to spoil it for you. I won't spoil it. But the plane was in the movie. And there are so many amazing things about aviation. When I was a kid, I used to go to Santa Monica Airport and just watch the planes take off and land. I loved aviation so much and still love it. And yes, your host knows how to fly a plane. And I will tell you about how my mom talked me out of flying, which sometimes you should listen to Mom. Yes, I know, Mom, you're probably listening, and I admit it, you were right about that one. So I didn't start flying recreationally because not enough time to do it and to do it well. So we'll get to our guest in a moment. We have Lynette Zang back with us today to talk about gold. Yes, gold. And she's a bit of a gold bug. I'm not a gold bug, but gold has a lot to teach us, and we're going to dive into all sorts of monetary policy issues that should be very interesting to real estate investors. And we'll get to that in a moment here. But back to aviation. It is amazing. Number one, and it's I kind of liken it to real estate because it is amazing how enduring these aircraft frames are. Yes. When they design a plane, it is so difficult to design an aircraft that we still have the same basic aircraft designs that were created in the 60s. Yes, a very innovative time in the world and in the US, the 60s. And it's amazing to me how we sort of think we are living in this amazing time. And in many ways, it is an amazing time to be alive. You've heard me say that. But in a lot of ways, a lot of this amazingness was invented a long time ago. These airframes, now the electronics on the planes have certainly advanced and changed, but the basic airframe was invented decades and decades ago. I mean, think about it. The 747, when was its first flight? Late 60s, early 70s? And it's just incredible how little innovation in many ways there has been since then. And I attribute that largely to fiat money. Yes, and we've talked about that before. You screw up the money and you screw up a lot of things. Just imagine if we had taken that same exponential path of invention from the late 1800s into the 1900s and the 60s, a particularly innovative time, and the 50s as well, when we did all kinds of amazing things in the world. And I don't know. It's just an interesting debate. It's interesting to look at that. Also, you notice that these amazing inventions weren't burdened very much with crazy lefty ideas like affirmative action, right? They were just a meritocracy, right? The best people were recruited, were tapped to do all of these amazing things like the Manhattan Project that ended World War II. The examples are endless of this. Just really think about it. Think about it. Look back to how people like Buckminster Fuller and the rest predicted the future, and how a movie, a great movie, by the way, 2001: A Space Odyssey by one of the greatest directors ever, Stanley Kubrick, was created in the 60s. And they were envisioning what 2001 would be like. Well, we traded that. We traded the flying cars. We traded all of this for the welfare state and for political correctness. It's just truly unbelievable. Fiat money, the PC movement, the welfare state, all of this was traded for the incredible greatness of innovation we should have had. Now, we've certainly had a lot of greatness and innovation anyway, despite these forces. But just imagine what it would have been, because you can't hear the dogs that don't bark. We never know what might have been if we had not had Nixon in 1971 taking us off the gold standard. If we had not had the rise of the Great Society, well, really promoted before LBJ, but during the Great Depression by Roosevelt. And at least Roosevelt made it a make work program. People had to work, right? They had to build the Hoover Dam and do all kinds of great things, right? In the interstate highway system. But just imagine if we hadn't had LBJ's Great Society. Just imagine what we would have done if things were a meritocracy and if money was sound. Just really think about that. Ponder it, study it. Listen to my prior episodes on this topic because it's truly amazing. And the Top Gun movie really was another example of that. They didn't say it. No, it wasn't in there. It's just something you could read between the lines, right? You know, why don't we have a plane like the beginning, the first real scene of the movie? Why don't we have that plane? I mean, think about it. What was it? The SR-71 or is it the SR-72? SR-71, I think, was the plane. I mean, that was decades old. And the record still has yet to be broken for the speed at which an airplane can travel, right? I mean, how is it that we have not broken that record? And it's been decades. That's a shame. That is a real shame, folks. But anyway, the movie is great. See it once, see it twice. And, you know, you got to just notice Tom Cruise for a moment. I mean, you know, look, I know everybody has their complaints about Tom Cruise and Scientology and all of this stuff. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But clearly, this guy has got to be the most successful actor of all time. I mean, is there a more successful actor than that? I don't know. Not that I'm aware of. But truly, the movie is awesome. Go see it. Check it out. It's great. Okay, before we get to our guest today, I have literally 2 slides to show you. I know, it's usually a lot more than that. But this one, you know, for all of the crash bros out there who are waiting for the real estate crash, don't hold your breath. Because as of now, these are Black Knight statistics. Black Knight does a lot of stats on the real estate industry and, you know, what's going on out there. And as of now, look at this statistic. This goes into something I have predicted would create an ongoing housing shortage, possibly for decades to come. As of now, Black Knight says 24% of all first lien mortgages have interest rates below 3%. Wow. Now, there was the wrong sound effect. I don't even know what that sound effect is. This is the one I meant to give you. 24% of all mortgages have an interest rate below 3%. What in the world would motivate these people to ever sell those properties? Think of the mortgage market, meaning all of the existing mortgages out there in the country and in the world. Think of that for a moment. And think of what happens to those existing mortgages when interest rates on current and future mortgages are higher. The value of the existing mortgages goes up dramatically, but the cost to repay those mortgages goes down dramatically. Well, that means, if you think about it, think about that thing we've discussed, that principle that most people consider the house the asset and the mortgage the liability. I know that's how it's going to look on a balance sheet. But is that the correct way to look at it? I would argue, no, it's not the correct way. Because when that mortgage is a below current rate mortgage and becomes irreplaceable, remember, the two value drivers for anything, whether it be currency, mortgages, precious metals, whatever, the two value drivers are simply scarcity and utility. That's it. According to Jason Hartman, yours truly, that's my definition of the two value drivers for anything, scarcity and utility. That's what makes something valuable. Well, the mortgages have tons of utility because they're financing people's homes, whether they be investment properties or personal residences. And they are totally scarce because they are irreplaceable. They can never be created again. This will create a housing shortage for decades to come. And remember, this is the 24% of the people who have mortgages below 3%. But what about the rest of them have mortgages below 3.5%, or below 4%, or below 4.5%, or below 5%? All of these people have irreplaceable mortgages that cannot be duplicated. Done. Baked. Now, maybe we'll see mortgage rates go down in the future, but it looks like this week they'll probably go up even more. So show me, crash bros. That's what they call them, the crash bros. Where is the distressed seller? Where is the massive influx of inventory going to ever come from? Remember, 40% of the homes in the country are free and clear. So you got 24% with mortgage rates below 3% on existing mortgages. You got 40% that are free and clear. How would you create distress in a market that would cause millions of people to suddenly unload their homes? It just ain't going to happen. We'll see. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm going to be wrong about that. We'll see. What do you think? Go to jasonhartman.com/ask. Also, contest winners, or not contest. I keep calling it that. It's a raffle. It's a giveaway. Winners for last week on the YouTube comments, $50 Amazon gift card goes to Ted Bauer, who made a comment on one of the YouTube videos, the best real estate information. Thanks, Jason. Okay. And then Brady GTT did an Apple podcast review that says, love Jason's insights. Nothing more permanent than a temporary government initiative, or something like that. Love Jason's insights. That was actually Milton Friedman's insight. I would love to take credit, but I can't. It is brilliant for sure. He can come across a little confident, too confident sometimes, but hey, okay. All right, there you go. All right, folks, winners, go to jasonhartman.com/ask, claim your $50 Amazon gift card. And let's get to our guest today, Lynette. She will also be here with us on Wednesday again to discuss all the things we're discussing in two parts. So here we go. It is my pleasure to welcome back my favorite lady in the gold business, and that is returning guest Lynette Zang. She is here to talk to us about quite a few things. Of course, she's the chief market analyst for ITM Trading, and she is up at her retreat, I guess I'll call it. Lynette, welcome back.
It's good to be back, Jason. It's good to see you again. And
Likewise.
yes, it's also really good to be up here at my bug out house.
Yep. Your bug out house. That's probably the better name for it. And
Yes.
you've talked about that extensively the last time we were both sharing the stage at George Gammon's event. You talked about that a lot. But, today, Lynette, I'd like to start with just sort of your general impression of what is going on. A lot of things are changing right now in the economy. Of course, COVID 1984 really changed the world, I think, really for a generation. I think this is going to be a very long-term shift in just the way everything operates. But lately, we've seen interest rates go up a lot. Mortgage rates are higher. Still, real estate inventory is extremely low, but it has ticked up just a little. So, we'll see if that changes. Of course, gold is holding pretty well, for sure. Crypto, though, is way down. What do you think? I mean, gosh, there's just a lot to talk about.
There is so much to talk about. But, if you want to talk a little bit about crypto and, you always have to be careful when anything is named a certain way, because it means it's just the opposite, like the stable coins, which don't.
They ain't so stable.
Exactly. And being able to shift from proof of work to proof of stake.
Right.
I don't know. Gold, when I look at gold, it's used across every single avenue of the economy, and they haven't really figured out how to duplicate it in a lab. And so it's proof. Yes, you have to test it to make sure that it's real. I mean, that's obviously we work with our wholesalers and everything is certified. But, gold is gold, and there isn't any substitute. They've tried for 6,000 years to find a substitute, and they have not been able to do it.
Yep. The alchemists tried to duplicate it in a lab, so that doesn't seem to be a possibility. It's such a unique metal. They will eventually get it from space, from asteroids and so forth, but boy, talk about an expensive shipping cost.
Yeah, really. But even so, even if they created this great big find of gold, the whole point of it is that there is a finite amount. And you can't really, I know that they want to say that in the crypto world, that, it's immutable, that you can't take it back, that you can't do this or you can't do that, when we've seen, a number of instances when all of the things that they profess really aren't true, because it's still a big test. This is still new. So, and I know
what I like to say about crypto is that people have to realize Bitcoin is just a teenager. It's a very young, new thing. Gold is 5,000 years old, right? Or really forever old, but it's been valued for 5,000 years that we can tell, at least.
Exactly. And what the powers that be want is for all of our titles, for all of our equity to be held on these coins. That's what they've been pushing for a very long time. And you have to ask yourself how comfortable you really feel about doing something like that. I don't feel comfortable with it, but should there be the next real estate crisis and people are trying to save what they've accumulated, just like we saw in 2008, they end up making choices that are not necessarily in their best interest. And my guess is that'll be one way to start to move property and equity into the digital universe.
Right.
Direction we're going in. We're just not done yet. It's still a battle royale.
Absolutely. We're seeing very significant inflation. Of course, the government wants us to believe it's about 8.5%. Of course, we know better. What do you think the real rate of inflation is?
Probably closer on average to 15%.
Yeah, I agree. 16% is probably the right number. And where do you think this is going? I mean, is this going to persist at this level for many years? Will get better and decline a little or get worse?
Here's the problem. And this is the piece that I've studied since 1987. We are at the end of this current monetary experiment. And central banks are out of tools, because really the key tool that they've had are interest rates. And they've been anchored at zero since 2008, and their balance sheets, which are at nosebleed levels. So what do they have to regulate the rate and speed of inflation. Are they doing that because that's really going to help inflation or because it's going to help their credibility? I think it's about credibility, because you can look at Mexico, who has been really aggressively raising rates, and yet they are still dealing with double-digit inflation. So personally, I do think that we're at the early stages of the hyperinflationary event, and we'd be in it if it weren't for the confidence still in the currency, which is incredible to me, but okay, it's our tool of barter, and it's hard for people to shift that. But I think we're headed into a hyperinflationary depression. The system is already shifting, right? They have to reset it. We need a big enough crisis to get everybody on board.
Right. So put a number on hyperinflation. There doesn't seem to be much agreement as to academically, what that means. How much is that?
Officially, it's a 50% annual inflation level. But in reality, when you see prices double, triple, it really is more about the speed at which those prices can double and triple, et cetera, et cetera. For some that are in the lowest echelon and they have to make a choice between putting gas in their car to get to work or putting food on the table to feed their family, they're already in that event.
Yeah.
Sadly, so it's relative.
Yeah, it is. Sadly, that is so true. And everybody has their own personal inflation rate. So inflation is just a wealth transfer from the poor and the middle class to the upper middle and the rich, who benefit the most from it. And, I was thinking of you today, Lynette, in anticipation of our interview. One of my listeners, and you probably have these too, sent me these years ago, these Zimbabwe dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do have them. Look at you. You could be a trillionaire in Zimbabwe and not be able to buy eggs.
Now, these have been demonetized, but there was a time when one Zimbabwe dollar actually had legitimate value. And here I'm holding a $100 trillion Zimbabwe note. But, the U.S. kind of can get away with a lot, can it? Because it is the reserve currency, right?
Well, officially, yes. The transition started back really in 2000-ish, when the Federal Reserve started buying treasury bonds very quietly. So already we couldn't fund all of our debt externally. We had to go internally to do that. And lately, boy, it's just headline after headline after headline about the loss of that status as the world reserve currency. So, we've been knowing that it's been coming. It happens to every single currency. But I think what we've really witnessed, let me say the world has really witnessed, is the abuse of power by the U.S. Right. If we don't like what you're doing, we just, boom, cut you off at the knees and you have no access to, any foreign markets. And we saw it again in Canada. Right? At our level, at your and my level, they didn't like what the truckers were doing. So boom, they just cut them off at the knees.
It is amazing and incredibly scary that a democratic country like Canada could turn into a tyranny.
Yeah.
That's just shocking what is happening there and still happening. Trudeau thinks he's some sort of a dictator. I can't believe it.
It is really scary, and that's right next door. And most people kind of thought of Canada as, a sister to the US.
Yeah.
And even the US, if you look at globally in the democracies around the world since 2020, they have gotten so aggressively heavy-handed about removing our rights and also really tamping down free speech, the right to protest.
Yep.
And I came across this piece, it's a March 2022, an IMF piece, where they talked about what was happening on a global level. So as we know, the central banks are really out of tools. So they're trying all different kinds of experiments. We've talked about modern money theory, where they can just print however much money that they want, as long as you're a reserve currency, so that you can pay your debts in that currency. It doesn't really work, because every time a central bank prints money, the money that's already out there loses value. But I think that what I found really interesting is this next experiment, which they don't want to call modern money theory because that has a bad name. So let's just call it outright transfers. Now, Jason, you might recall that I think it was 2019, to a lot of, well, at least in my world, a lot of pomp and circumstance, the Federal Reserve created the Fed Now accounts. So every single American has an account with the Federal Reserve, whether they realize it or not. And so during the next crisis, it's a button push. They talk about central bank digital currencies.
Modern monetary theory just appears to be a fantasy, if you ask me. I just can't see how that would really work in real life. But the left likes it because it takes away any tether that the government would have on spending.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just a fantasy to think that a government, a company, or an individual can just spend, and there won't be consequences. Of course there are consequences.
Incredibly, in this particular paper, they talk about, I mean, right now, all right, when we were on a gold-backed currency, the level of gold that was held in reserve was restrictive to the level of debt that could be created. All right, now we go into the fiat world, and as of 1971, the level of debt that created the money, but there were still quasi limitations. I mean, we've seen the balance sheets explode, many trillions of dollars since 2008. But in this new outright transfer system, all you have to do is want to have more money to do a project or to do something. And boom, it's created. What do you think that does to the value of the currencies that are already out there?
I mean, it's so obvious a child could understand this.
It's
incredible that they think they can just do this with no tether, with no responsibility whatsoever.
When you have already declared bankruptcy, which is basically what governments have done, they can't ever pay this debt. No. It's not that it's unsustainable, it's unpayable, and they know it. Then what difference does it make if you happen to have credit cards that you can run up as much as you can on these credit cards? And that's what's coming, because the central banks are out of tools. They are out of tools. And now it's becoming quite obvious that they are out of tools. And,
right.
And if you think about going back to 2008, because that's really when the system died, and you look at what they did during that period of time, that's when the QE started, quantitative easing. And they've just printed so much money, and all of that inflation was held in targeted assets: stocks, bonds, real estate. These were the three targets that they overtly said, we have targeted them for reflation. So the fact that they are now forced to raise interest rates into this severely, and we would have discussion on the real estate part, but into a severely stretched market, look at the stock market. Just look at the stock market. It's schizophrenic. It doesn't know what to do because its drug of choice is being taken away for a minute.
Yeah. And its drug of choice is easy money and low interest rates.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you said earlier, Lynette, that we're at the end of this experiment.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Since we're all living in uncharted waters, I just want to ask you, how do we know that? How do we know we're at the end of the experiment? I mean, is it possible that they can just keep kicking this can down the road for 5, 10, 20 years, 80 years, a lifetime?
No. And the way that we know that is there are those repeatable patterns that happen right around the end of this currency's life cycle. War being one of them. We've talked about that before. We didn't know where the war was going to start, but we knew there was going to be a war. And so, war is one, civil rights are another, women's issues are another, severely overvalued stock markets. I mean, there's all of these repeatable patterns that tell you, and the fact that they're out of tools. That's another one. You look at the interest rate graph, you look at the purchasing power graph from the Federal Reserve Education Department. This graph, that's my favorite, probably my very favorite website. And what you're looking at here is a purchasing power chart of the consumer dollar. And you can see how quickly it has escalated on the way down.
Right.
That is actually a result of inflation, where you can see it. But if you go over to the left-hand side of the screen and you see the number 35, 34, well, that's actually 0.03. It's not even 0.035 cents. See, it's below that. So there's about 3 cents left officially out of the purchasing power of the dollar. And no, I don't think
from when the Federal Reserve was created 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago, right? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So $1 would buy $1's worth of goods. Now that dollar only buys not even 3 cents or not even 4 cents.
It's really surprising, number one, that this is your favorite website, because the powers that be run it. I just have to throw that in.
They're more honest on it.
Interestingly, you're right, because it's amazing that they even publish this stuff. This is literally a report card on bad central banking. And it's on their website, but whatever. Maybe they were just not that coordinated.
True. But think about this. What happens when the purchasing power gets to zero?
Yeah.
Where do they go from there?
Well, here's the thing. What they've done pretty successfully, actually, is they have hidden a lot of this inflation that is in the system. Oh, yeah. And Lynette, I don't think I've ever talked to you about this, but and this is solely my opinion. I've never read or heard this anywhere, but it's interesting to me that Nixon closes the gold window on August 15th of 1971. Mm-hmm. And right in that same era, he takes that historic trip to China. Did he have the foresight to see that massive inflation was coming and there was this huge workforce of 1 billion people in China that we could make trade deals with? Like, that would have been amazing. I mean, he was definitely, regardless of all his faults, he was a smart man. There's no question about that. Globalization. Yeah. And then allowing immigration from Mexico. You can import the products cheap from China and elsewhere. And all these free trade agreements that have just sold American jobs down the river. And then, why won't they control the southern border? Well, it's because they're importing deflationary pressure from Mexico with cheap labor and importing deflationary pressure from China and abroad with cheap products and outsourced services. And then, of course, technology is the natural inflation fighter, right?
Right.
So they've been able to do that pretty well. If those things didn't happen, inflation would have run rampant, not just in the 70s, but 80s, 90s, 2000s, right?
Exactly. That is so brilliant for you to point that out, because as a new stockbroker in the 80s, all the talk was about globalization. And they did. That's exactly what they did. They imported the deflation. But the reason why they cannot continue this on, 5 year, I can't see it. No, I can't see it. I can't even see it 5 years.
Well, what's the reason? What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, because we're at the end, because they're out of tools.
And we'll be back with a lot more on this topic with this guest on our next episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.